I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather today is the beautiful, traditional, unceded, and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We're delighted that all of you were able to join us this evening to share the perspectives of the Honorable Sean Fraser, who's right here, the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure, and Communities. You know, there are very few issues that are as fundamental as shelter, for sure. It's the basic thing that we all need. Few topics transcend so much of the work of the university and its faculty as well. Shelter requires construction and design, and for that you need architects, I should say, and we have one of the best and largest schools of architecture here at Carleton University. Engineers and scientists, some of whom are in the room right now, I'm looking out at them, who develop improved materials, products, and techniques. Construction projects need to be costed and managed and all of that, paid for. You need project managers, accountants, marketers, all of whom can be found in the business schools across the country, like the Sprott School of Business here. Shelter, importantly, requires standards and regulation, and for that you need public policy experts. For example, coming from Carleton's own Faculty of Public Affairs. And of course, relevant to what we have here today, it requires political leadership and political staff. And for that, at Carleton, we turn to the students in the faculty of the Clayton Riddell Masters in Political Management. We're eminently proud of this group, really influential, small but influential group, who are the architects of tonight's event. The program was founded 10 years ago, and in that short time has become the preeminent center of learning and research on political management in Canada. In fact, there's hardly a federal or provincial office that does not contain at least one of our alums, including the Office of the Minister Fraser, who's here to speak with us tonight. We're delighted to welcome you, Minister Fraser. The Honorable Sean Fraser was elected first as a member of Parliament from Central Nova in 2015. He's previously served as a Minister of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship, and holds a law degree and lots of other degrees, so many from Dalhousie, Master's degree of Public and International Law from Leiden University in the Netherlands, and a Bachelor of Science from St. FX. But tonight, you're our guest here at Carleton University, and so let me get out of the way and off the podium, and I'll ask you to share some of your thoughts today.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
We'll do that again.
I want to say how wonderful it is to be with you here for a discussion on what I believe is one of the most pressing issues in Canadian politics, and that's housing. It's wonderful to be here on campus with you at Carleton, and as the President has pointed out, there's a number of people who have worked in my office over the years since I've been an MP who've come through either the Political Affairs and Political Management program or the MPM program as well. And in some cases, including my current Chief of Staff, who is an alumni of both programs. It's an extraordinary pipeline for political talent who has a straight shot to Parliament Hill and an opportunity to work in MPs' offices and senators' offices, working as pages sometimes while people are studying on campus here, and to quickly see how extraordinary people are able to move through the ranks of political staff in Ottawa gives me confidence that those of you who are studying in the programs would be very well served from the education that you're receiving here. It's one of the unique things in Canada that you have effectively a school that is equipping young professionals with the skills they need to enter the workforce immediately at the highest level of government in the country. And for those of you who are studying, congratulations, you've made an excellent decision. Maybe to focus on the issue at hand, Canada is experiencing a housing crisis, like things we have not seen in many, many years. And I think it's important, if we're going to solve that housing crisis, that we identify where it came from, because only when we understand the constituent reasons behind the situation we're dealing with are we going to be able to overcome the challenges that we face as a country. One of the things that I think is important for us to understand is when we talk about a housing crisis or the need to build X number of units over time, this is real people and real communities that we're talking about. The impact that we're seeing, given the scale of the crisis that we're facing, is manifesting itself in extremely challenging and sometimes horrific ways for people and for communities. When I talk to people from across the country who are experiencing housing needs, it's extraordinary, the stories that I hear. Sometimes it's people I know that I'm close with who are having challenges. I've got a family member today who's recently had her 4th child, who has been told that her landlord needs to sell their place because with rising interest rates, they can't afford to keep it. And they said, if you want me to keep this place, I'm going to have to increase your rent by over $1,000 a month. This is a young mom who's got 4 kids, who's a member of my family, that doesn't know what she's going to do because the community she lives in has absolutely no vacancy. It's a university town in Nova Scotia. These are very real challenges that people are dealing with. When I'm talking to students from across the country, they're telling me that if they can find a place, sometimes it's an hour commute away from the place that they go to school. Sometimes they're dealing with living conditions that they wouldn't put up with if there was anything else available. And rarely have I met a student who can actually find a place that's within the budget they anticipated when they started their studies. This is causing people to take on extra work if they can find it, which is compromising their ability to focus on their studies, which is what motivated them to move into the community where they're going to school in the first place. When I hear people talking about living in accommodations with more roommates than a building is designed to handle to keep their costs low, and dealing with landlords who don't want to maintain a basic level of repair because they know they don't have to, it communicates to me that we got problems and we need to address them. When I look at the plight of people who are maybe not too far removed from their students but seeking to begin their careers, it worries me, not just for the individual, but for our entire communities at a time, the entire country at a time, when young people who are starting their careers can't afford a place to live in the place that they found that job. The reality is that my view is if you work in this country, you should be able to afford a place to live. And if you can't work, the government should work to make sure you have a place to live anyway. There's too many people who are making decisions out of economic duress that's compromising the vibrancy of communities. And I think we all lose when that happens. I'm not too far removed, though I've got a different job now, from circumstances that caused me to take decisions I didn't really want to. When I finished school, my wife and I both spent a lot of time going to school. And when we finished, we had immense student loans to pay back. Both of us grew up in the same small town in Nova Scotia, where I live again today, thankfully. It's where I always wanted to be. But when I realized that working in my hometown wasn't an option for me because I didn't have access to a job that was going to allow me to pay off my student loans, we moved to Calgary. And I love the city. It's a wonderful place. It wasn't my intention to ever become a Calgarian, but nevertheless, my wife and I found ourselves there with a lot of other East Coasters who were looking for the economic opportunities that a bigger urban center could have provided. The reality is, for people who want to move to a big city, it's a great option. But people shouldn't be forced to move away from the community that they call home because they can't afford to live in the place that they come from. Although my motivation for seeking economic opportunities elsewhere was largely driven by student debt, today the issue is not just student debt, but it's housing costs as well. And the thing that I find challenging is that when you're dealing with paying off a student loan, you will get there one day. If we don't correct the course we're on, housing costs are going to continue to force people to take decisions about their lives that they don't want to take for a very long time. Now, one of the things that we should come to understand is that it's not just an impact on the individuals that we need to be concerned about, but collectively, when you look at the impact of housing costs in Canada on our economy, it is an enormous bottleneck to the future prosperity of this country. Canada is a country that has extraordinary opportunities that would make most of the world wish they could be in our position. But if we want to maximize the economic potential of our country, grow the economy in a way that allows us to provide services for people who need them, we're going to need to make sure that people who want to live in this country, want to seek economic opportunity in this country, have a place to live in this country. One of the things that I think is important for all of us to come to understand is that we can solve the problems before us, but it's going to take a very deliberate effort on the part of the government and governments at all levels. And it's going to take actors not just inside government, but within the private sector and within the nonprofit sector as well. But if the way I began, if we're going to actually overcome the challenge before us, we really need to understand where it comes from. So I'm going to spend the bulk of my remarks really discussing the constituent causes of the housing crisis that we're dealing with, and perhaps at the end of my remarks, before we pivot to questions, talk a little bit about the opportunities that I see if we get this right. So we need to build homes. We need to build them by the millions. CMHC put a report out recently indicating we need to build 3.5 million homes, more than we are on pace to build today, by 2030, if we want to restore the level of affordability that existed about 20 years ago. Now, forget the fact that 20 years ago, housing wasn't particularly affordable, but considerably more so than it is today. Just to put this into perspective, 3.5 million more than we're on pace to puts it as close to 6 million homes over the next 7 years or so. There's only 16.5 million homes in the country total today. So this is a major increase in the housing stock that we need to make available. And if we're going to do it, we need to pull every lever at our disposal. So just to give you a bit of an impression of where the challenges are coming from that has us so short in housing supply, I feel it's important that we consider that the problems are not that complicated. And we as a society, I find, have the very bad habit of making big problems seem complicated. The housing challenges we're facing is a very big problem, but when you actually dig into the challenges behind it, they're pretty straightforward. The first challenge that I see is really making sure that the math works for people who are going to build the homes that we need. We've seen an enormous increase in the cost of building homes in this country for a number of reasons over the last number of years, which is driving up the cost for people who want to get into the market to own a home or even to find a place to rent. The reality is there are not people building the kinds of homes today that are accessible for people to rent, and particularly young people who have not had an opportunity to be working long enough to save up for a down payment. When I actually look at the shortage of rental properties in this country, it's unthinkable that you can move to a big city and have nothing available for rent. For people who actually lose the ability to continue to live in the place that they were renting, if that happens to you in Canada, there's almost nowhere in this country where you can find another apartment on the market at the same price you were paying when you got kicked out of the one before. This is an enormous challenge for people who are trying to find a place to live and have some security of tenure, so they actually know where they're going to be and know that they're not only going to be able to live in the specific place that they were living before, but even maintain their ability to live in the city that they want to live in. This is a huge challenge. And what it's caused is for builders to make sure that they can actually make a little bit of money when they build a place. With the rising costs, the only option remaining for a lot of home builders is to build a luxury condominium that they can sell at an exorbitant price to make sure that they're protecting their ability to make money at the end of the day. Now, some of the reasons that you're seeing this upward pressure on costs has to do with the increasing cost of materials and supplies. Some of it has to do with the increasing cost of land. Some of it has to do with the dramatic rise in interest rates we've seen on the heels of the pandemic. But when you look at the combined impact of these different constituent charges that we're seeing build up to drive up the cost of building, what you're seeing is either builders choosing to build that more expensive living quarters or to not build at all. There are hundreds of thousands of homes that have been approved for construction in this country, but the plans are sitting on a shelf somewhere because the builders can't justify going ahead with the project because they know they're going to lose money. There's things we can do as a government to change that equation. You would have seen perhaps recently, a number of weeks ago, we moved forward with the removal of GST on new apartment construction in this country. Just yesterday, we saw the province of Ontario announce they're formally going to do the same. To put that in perspective, that one policy change combined with the provincial effort in this province is going to reduce the cost of building by 13%. On a large project that might cost $100 million, what you're seeing is a $13 million savings that can either be passed on through lower costs or justify a project to go ahead in the first place. And when we build more stock, we're going to level out the supply and demand in the market, which is going to create a greater likelihood that if you do need to seek a different place to live, you're more likely to be able to find one at the price that you were paying before. And that's essential. But it's not just the cost of building that has us where we are today. There is a major problem with the way that cities build homes, or in many instances don't build homes in this country. One of the things that I find remarkable around a campus community like this is that it's not surrounded by dense apartment buildings for people to live in large numbers near the place where they want to study. Sometimes that's a result of deliberate choices by municipal levels of government to make it illegal to build the kinds of homes that we need. For those of you who follow me online, you'll see I'm engaging in a handful of wrestling matches with municipal leaders across the country who I should say for the most part have been excellent partners who want to do more as well. But when you come to think of it, my view is that it's a pretty radical position that we accept the status quo, which is that in most neighborhoods, you're not allowed to build apartments. There's a lot of places in Canada where the only thing you're allowed to build is a single family home. It's wonderful if you want to live in a single family home, and if that's what you have ambition for in life, that's terrific, and we should create opportunities for that as well. But there's a lot of people at different portions of their life who just want a place to live in the city where they want to be, who just want to know that they can go home and be safe at night and live life fully in their community. There's things we can do to incentivize the kind of changes that we want to see that's going to allow more homes to come onto the market in significant numbers. We've developed a new program called the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is designed to create incentives to help cities change the way, or rather change the kinds of homes that they allow to be built. When you actually chat with people who've had the experience of living in a small apartment building in a neighborhood that used to be zoned for single family homes, they tell me that it's working very well. I had an opportunity to meet a young family in Kelowna, BC, just about a week ago, and one of the family members told me that they're living the dream. They're a 2-walk block from their school, they're living adjacent to a park, and they live in a fourplex that happens to be in a neighborhood that used to only permit single family homes. A simple policy change has created a space for 4 families where there only used to be space for 1. If we actually put money on the table, I'm finding that municipal leaders are actually hungry to do what they can to do their part to change the way that they allow home building to take place so they can create space for more neighbors without compromising the character of their communities, without permanently changing what their city looks like, but simply allowing space for the people who are going to make it happen. Now, there's other things that we need to do as a government as well if we're going to make that happen. We need to continue to fund the infrastructure necessary because there's a lot that goes into building a home. You need to make sure if you're going to have more residents, you've got the water and wastewater to service the building, but you actually have to make sure that you're building communities because apartments are not meant to be storage for human beings. They're meant to be places for people to live in complete communities. We need to be making sure that we're investing in the cultural infrastructure, the recreational infrastructure, the things that are actually going to make communities desirable places to live and allow people to experience a full life. My view is that if we work with different levels of government, we're going to be able to not only build spaces for people to go to bed at night, but livable communities where people have access to transit that gets them to the economic opportunities that they want to pursue, that gets them to the services that they need to do well and to be well. We need to continue to work with different levels of government to make that happen. One of the other challenges beyond the cost of building, beyond the way that cities build homes, that I find so enormously frustrating is the retreat from governments, I should say both liberal and conservative governments, for the majority of my lifetime, when it comes to actually investing in housing for low-income families. What we've seen from the late 80s and early 90s onward was a decision taken by successive federal governments that housing wasn't their responsibility. What we're living with now when it comes to a shortage of stock, when it comes to non-market homes, homes that are deliberately built to make sure that low-income families have a place to live, the situation we're dealing with now is a direct and predictable consequence of 30 years of government policy not to invest in affordable housing. Now, there's many challenges as I've been discussing and will continue to elaborate on that lead to it. But when you actually pull hundreds of thousands of units out of the non-market supply by not making investments over years, you're going to deal with hundreds of thousands of families who don't have a place to live that they can afford. We've stepped back into this space in 2017 with the National Housing Strategy, which has been a healthy start. This is an enormous government program, combined investments of tens of billions of dollars that's building out stock of units for people to live in that they can actually afford. But we need to do so much more. Because despite the fact that we are making enormous investments to build more stock and to retrofit homes that can be offered at a price that people can afford, we're also seeing the rapid loss of housing that is affordable that exists within the market today. Those apartments that used to be rented for less than $1,000 have been bought up and are being renovated and now offered at $2,000 or $3,000 a month. Prices that most people can't make happen in communities where they have grown up, where they lived their whole lives, and are causing people to move away from the places that they love and the people that they love. I think that we can overcome some of these challenges if we actually bake into federal policy and need to continue to make these investments permanently to support the continued investment in non-market housing. As I said before, if you can't work, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to have a place to live. To me, it is an enormous moral failure when we consider the possibility that someone's going to live in our community and be expected to participate and contribute to a community if we create a circumstance where they don't have a place where they can live. When a person doesn't have a place to live, if we actually park the moral argument for a moment, there's an enormous economic cost to society. People who can't find a place to live more often fall into problems with mental health and addictions. People who can't afford a place to live more often run into challenges with the justice system, whether it's police on the ground level or the court system, which ties up public resources. People who can't afford a place to live are less likely to maximize their economic potential by finding the job that they find fulfilling and allows them to earn a paycheck as well. I remember one of my first meetings I took as a new member of parliament near the end of 2015 was with a gentleman who lives in my community who told me that he couldn't afford a car and he couldn't get around, and he was really struggling because the cost of renting a place was beyond his capacity because he wasn't able to work at that time. One of the reasons he couldn't work was because he had no ability to actually get to places outside of walking distance from his home. He happened to live in an area where the only employers are the liquor store and the grocery store and the post office. They weren't hiring, and the next town over was going to be nearly an hour walk for him. I live in a community that until recently hasn't had a transit system since I was about 7 years old. The reality is, because of the cost of housing and because of the lack of infrastructure, this is somebody who had the ability to work, but financially couldn't make it happen. And because he isn't able to work, he isn't able to contribute to the community, and all of us lose out because this isn't one person. This is happening en masse across Canada. And these are challenges that we can deal with if we make the investments in infrastructure, but also make the investments in affordable housing so a person has a roof over their head, regardless of the size of their paycheck. There's other challenges, too, that we need to overcome if we're actually going to address the housing crisis in a meaningful way. And one of them has to do with the productive capacity of the Canadian workforce. If we have our housing policy framework perfect, if we do everything right, we do not have the capacity to build anywhere nearly the number of homes that CMHC has indicated we need to build in order to restore affordability in the market. When you put that number in perspective, nearly 6 million homes we need to build by 2030, we're near record levels of home construction in Canada now. We're on pace to build about 250,000 homes this year. When you think about building nearly 6 million homes over a little more than the next 6 years, you don't need to have a math degree from Carleton to understand that we're not quite there. One of the reasons that we are in this challenging environment is the fact that we still build homes the way we did 100 years ago. We don't build anything else the way we did 100 years ago. We build everything else in factories. We found ways to become more efficient in the supply chain, but we still send people to the site where homes are going to be built, and we expect them to be able to somehow do it faster using the same tools and same techniques that we did a century ago. We need to do a number of things to grow the productive capacity of the workforce. We need to make sure we continue to invest in training opportunities so people have access to careers that tend to pay pretty well, by the way, that actually help contribute to a social challenge that we're dealing with. We need to continue to be welcoming towards newcomers who have the skills that our communities and our economy needs, but we also need to change the way that we build homes. There are enormous advances in technology taking place right now. And my view is that Canada can become on the front edge of this wave if we make the policy choices that enable a dramatic scale up when it comes to building homes differently. The technologies we have in mass timber create opportunities to build climate resilient homes. The opportunities we have in panelization and modular home building factories have cost efficiencies that are so much greater than traditional contractor built homes. We have huge opportunities to advance 3D printing in Canada that's going to allow us to build homes more quickly and more cost effectively than we currently do. But this is going to take serious effort by government and industry to work together if we're going to scale this up. one of the reasons that we tend to see people not making the investments in these kinds of factory-built homes that we could do more efficiently is the fact that real estate tends to be a boom and bust cycle. And somebody who's going to make a significant investment to build or scale a factory is very reticent to do it if they don't have a predictable need to build supply as the market cools down. There's things we can do to provide certainty to the market through government intervention, through support, through tax credits, through subsidies, to make these decision-making tables change the way they think about whether to move forward with a project or not. This is really exciting because I'm starting to see new opportunities in different parts of the country reveal themselves as a result of the immense needs that the Canadian market is facing. And because we're in such a dramatic place right now, my sense is it's the best possible time to invest in these kinds of new endeavors that's going to allow us to scale up the rate at which we can build homes by doing it differently. If we do all of these things right, there's still two other challenges that we need to overcome. One is the emergency situation that so many Canadians are living in right now. There's a number of different reasons that some Canadians don't have a home at all. I don't believe that we could ever declare that we've solved the housing crisis we're dealing with if we still walk past someone who doesn't have a place to go home at night on our way to work. I live in a small town in Nova Scotia, and for the first time in my life, we have encampments for people who are homeless in rural Nova Scotia. This is not something that we ever envisioned would be the case. I assumed when I was a kid growing up that homelessness was an issue for big cities in Canada. But what we've seen is the housing crunch has become so severe across this country over the last number of decades, and more acutely on the heels of the pandemic, is that there's hardly a community in this country that doesn't have a very serious homelessness problem. We see additional pressures being put on our systems as a result of vulnerable asylum seekers who come to Canada because they have no other place to go. And they tend to turn immediately to shelter systems to provide the very basics that allow them to survive. We're increasingly seeing people displaced by severe weather events as a result of climate change. In my own community, during Hurricane Fiona, there were thousands of people who were not able to stay in their homes for a number of weeks. We've seen Lytton in British Columbia burned to the ground as a result of wildfires that swept through the community. Increasingly, this is an issue that we're going to need to recognize and deal with by creating the kinds of temporary accommodations that allow people to become settled while they wait to be able to move back into their home or wait for a replacement if their home has been destroyed. One of my former colleagues who I mentioned I was in Kelowna a week ago, a former member of Parliament, he was my seatmate for my first few years in the House of Commons. He lost his home to the wildfires. His community has been wonderful to him. His insurance company is covering it, but he's dealing with the process still of trying to figure out where his new home is going to be. This is a very real issue that we need to deal with, and it may seem dramatic to people who've not lived through severe weather events, but this is going to continue to be a fact of life. Regardless of how aggressive our climate policy may be over the next number of years, there are changes that have been baked into the atmosphere for the last number of decades that will take thousands of years to undo. And we're going to live with the consequences, and if we plan accordingly, we can mitigate against the extent of some of those consequences. And finally, the last challenge that I want to identify that we need to overcome is creating an opportunity for people to get into the housing market who currently feel excluded. When I talk to people roughly of the demographic that this room is made up of, home ownership seems like a joke. The idea that you're going to be able to own a place someday is not even on the radar. People are more concerned about whether they can make rent next month rather than own a home next year. I don't think we have to give up on the idea that if you want to own a home, that should be a possibility for you. Now, there's some people who will criticize this point of view on the basis that we shouldn't create policies that gin up more demand in the marketplace. But I don't think it's fair to leave a generation of people out of the opportunities to own a home one day. The kinds of things that we have put forward over the past couple of years include the First Home Savings Account, which now has, in a fairly short period of time, 250,000 Canadians, disproportionately young Canadians, are saving up through this tax-free account for their first home. Creating an opportunity for people who want to own a home to take part in the market, I think is sensible policy, so long as we don't extend that to people who are buying their third and fourth home for investment purposes. But allowing people some intergenerational equity, I think, is a fair place to start. The good news is I remain optimistic. I sense that when I talk to people, particularly people a little bit younger than me and less, there's a deficit of hope in this country. People who feel like they have done everything right, feel like they've gotten screwed. People who are going to school, people who are studying something that they were told there was a career in, are finding on the back end of their education that they're stuck with student debt, but aren't benefiting from the economic promise that they had in their mind when they undertook their studies. The idea that they can find a place to live they can afford doesn't seem reasonable anymore. But I have the benefit of seeing around the corner a little bit when I talk to the people who are doing the incredible things that are going to help solve this housing crisis. And I remain optimistic that Canada actually can provide hope not just for the next generation, but for the next century. When I look at the fundamentals of the Canadian economy, we are positioned very, very well if we have the courage to make the policy choices to overcome the challenges that we're facing right now. We are a country right now that has the most educated workforce in the world. We are a country right now that has, we are the only, in fact, G7 economy right now that has trading relationships with every other G7 economy. We have an abundance of natural resources that would make the rest of the world blush, given how rich we are in terms of the critical minerals that are going to power clean tech for the next generation, the traditional industries that sustain different regions of Canada. We have more arable land than most other countries in the world. It's an incredible thing that we have going for us in Canada, but it'll all be for naught if we don't create an opportunity for people to live here. And in fact, Canada, for people around the world, has become recently the country of choice of any in the world that people want to move to pursue economic opportunity. We have never been in first place until about 2020. With all of these things going for us, if we can actually crack the housing problem and create opportunities for people to find a place to live and fulfill themselves by living in a complete community, I have enormous hope that we can put Canada on a very healthy track and experience a level of economic and social prosperity that currently seems to escape the imagination of far too many people. It's really an honor for me to be able to engage with you here tonight. I'm pleased to share a few of my own thoughts, but what I'm really here for is the conversation. So I'm looking forward to what questions you may have. Thank you so much.